hard to believe that television has evolved and changed so much. While TV didn't begin in the 50s, practically no one had a set before that. In fact, in 1949, 1 million sets had been sold, and by 1950, there were about 10 million sets in the U.S. So we're talking about 9 million TVs were sold in 1 year. TV in the 50s differed from TV of today. Programming was typically available only in the afternoon and evenings and was projected in black and white via an antenna. The rabbit ears. Ask your parents. They know what rabbit ears are. Antennas had to be pointed correctly to receive local stations. In spite of the technological challenges, TV became the new medium of choice. The 1950s were known as the golden age of television, primarily because most of it came from New York City, and anything from New York City was considered to be the best there was. The earliest TV shows were really just radio and vaudeville coming to a new medium. Some of these shows were quite successful. I Love Lucy and Gunsmoke, for example. Variety shows such as the Texaco Star Theater and the Ed Sullivan Show populated the early years, which gave many a vaudevillian comedian a chance to show off sight gags that radio wouldn't permit. Who are your heroes? Sometimes we turn to media for our heroes. The first TV shows included about 120 westerns. Mostly in black and white, cowboys set the standards of right and wrong. The earliest TV westerns were mostly for children, typified by Roy Rogers. In the mid-1950s, Gunsmoke began its 20-year run and was the first successful adult western. Listen to this clip of the Gunsmoke theme. Hop Along Cassidy, Wagon Train, Have Gun Will Travel, Bonanza, and Rawhide, starring a very young Clint Eastwood, all dominated the airways. This decade known as the golden age of television in large part because of the variety shows that dominated the early part of the decade. Variety was to the early 50s what the Western was to the late 50s. Television variety shows were simply live comedy shows by comedians. Because these programs spotlighted talent from many sources, they were the ideal springboard for fresh new faces. The king of variety shows of the 1950s was undoubtedly Uncle Milty, or Milton Berle. He reigned supreme in the 50s as the star of the Texaco Star Theater. The public of the 50s also fell in love with TV game shows. At their peak, there were 22 game shows on the air. Some were played for prizes and some for big money. Some of the shows survive today. Bill Cullen was the original Drew Carey in 1956 when he hosted The Price is Right. On the $64,000 question, contestants entered an isolated booth and struggled to answer questions. Another popular isolation booth type of show was 21, where contestants chose how many points to wager on questions in a chosen category. Unfortunately, many of these shows were rigged. Producers of 21 and the $64,000 question were both found to have provided the contestants with answers. If contestants were likable and going for big money, viewers were likely to tune in next week to see if they could keep going. What is your favorite sitcom of all time? The situational comedy made its debut in the 1950s. It paved the way for today's multi-million-dollar episodes of weekly sitcom hits. Among the earliest successes were The Donna Reeves Show, Father Knows Best, The Honeymooners, and Leave It to Beaver. But the most famous and most successful of all was I Love Lucy, with Lucille Ball and husband Desi Arnaz. One of the things that made the sitcom so appealing was the aspect of live broadcast. Any mistakes during the show were seen by everyone watching. Actors and actresses learn to improvise and ad-lib. Watch this famous clip from I Love Lucy. If you don't know about I Love Lucy, Lucy is a woman struggling to become her own person. Her husband doesn't believe that women should be working outside of the home, and she's constantly challenging him and trying to prove that she can work outside the home. In this one, her and her best friend Ethel get a job at a chocolate factory.
Listen, Ethel, I think we're fighting a losing game. Here she comes.
Fine, you're doing splendidly. Speed it up a little.
We can only imagine how long Lucy was able to keep this job and having to go home and confess to Desi that she couldn't handle working. We're going to talk a little bit more about television in this next video clip. Many sitcoms, just like this one, often reflected what families were to be during the time period.
Television shows like Ozzie and Harriet and Father Knows Best reflected Americans' interest in home and family. They showed Americans what the perfect family should look like. A strong father with a good job, a sweet mother who cooked and took care of the home, and well-behaved, if sometimes mischievous, children.
So you can see the sitcom defines what the American family should look like. And by allowing Lucy to continue to struggle and not be a successful worker, it only re-emphasizes to the American women and men that a woman's place is in the home.